Bienvenidos, estamos con Mike Carey, guionista inglés, escritor de célebres novelas y guionista de muchos cómics conocidos, pues sobre todo de la línea Vértigo, de Lucifer, Unwritten, Lobezno Orígenes. Ahora está con Barbarella y vamos a hacerle unas pequeñas preguntas muy rápidas. Me interesa mucho el tema de Lucifer, sobre todo que es quizá la obra más importante, yo creo, una de las más importantes, que es la documentación sobre el guión.
So you mean the research I did, or how I came to have the job?
Mythology.
So obviously I was following in Neil Gaiman's footsteps, and what Neil had done in The Sandman was to create a mythology which was so big that it included all the mythologies and all the religions of all the cultures of the world. So he'd created a world where Christian angels, Judeo-Christian angels, could meet Japanese storm gods or Native American deities, and it all made sense. You know, they could coexist in the same world. And my brief on Lucifer really was to continue that story. Obviously, Lucifer is a character from the Judeo-Christian tradition, but as with Sandman, along the way we took in a great number of other mythologies, and I guess what I was trying to do was to explore the question of free will and predestination, which doesn't necessarily present to me as a religious or philosophical question. It is to do with the way human bodies work as physical systems, but the mythology of the Bible and all of the medieval apparatus that formed around the Bible create a perfect tool for examining that question. So in a sense, I just used the stories that I already knew, the stories that I grew up with as a young boy in Liverpool, going to church and to Sunday school, and the stories that I knew from my studies at Oxford, where I studied English literature.
Me interesa mucho la estética, los homúnculos. ¿Cómo decides con el dibujante qué forma tienen que tener esas criaturas?
So how did I interact with Peter on the series? I think, as with most of my collaborations, I started out by being quite controlling and quite specific. And I was working, before Peter Gross came onto the book, I was working with Chris Weston. He was the first penciler, and Chris's style is much less, is much more fully rendered, it's much less stylized. It's not so simple as Peter's style. And Chris Weston's pencil work lends itself to a very realistic, a very painstaking and detailed and precise depiction of the characters. And so we began from a position where our angels looked very like Renaissance angels from paintings of the 15th century. I think over the course of the series, that aesthetic changed somewhat. I think we began to move towards a presentation of heaven, the Silver City, as a kind of bureaucracy. And I think our angels became much less magnificent as the series went on, and much more down to earth, much more like fallible human beings trying to deal with a difficult day at work. So the aesthetic went from being sort of very grand and very remote to being very human and intimate, and that was Peter was leading the way there, really.
¿Libertad creativa, te daba total libertad creativa DC, o había unos límites? Por ejemplo, no tener miedo, no con los cristianos, por ejemplo, si le tenían miedo en algún momento a que se cabrearan algunas religiones o algunos...
Very, very few problems. We were... I can only remember one time when we were censored. And it was very, very frustrating because it was a silly and small thing, but it ruined one story for me. And it's quite late on in the run. It wasn't to do with Christianity. It wasn't to do with with respect or tolerance for other faiths. It was to do with mentioning politicians by name. So there was one issue where there's a young man who's in a punk band and he's singing a song, and the song was the song lyrics that I wrote were George fucking Bush married Tony fucking Blair. The church was made of corpses and the cake was pubic hair. And it's kind of like it's silly. It's parodic because it's not really making a political statement of any kind. It's just ludicrous and grotesque and rude. But my editor decided, well, this sounds like it might be offensive. So she changed the names. She changed George Bush to John Rush, and Tony Blair to Sony Lair or something like that, and it just became banal and pointless. But we were never challenged on the big issues. We had much more problem later on when we were doing the Unwritten, because in the Unwritten we were often dealing with literary texts that were still under copyright. Mm-hmm. And the DC legal department was very, very careful about copyright issues.
De Constantine o de Hellblazer, si Constantine es el más listo del mundo de DC, que siempre sale con la suya, con el chascarrillo, tú le das la vuelta y consigues que se sorprenda o le cambias el guión.
So I guess I was coming after Brian Azzarello on Hellblazer, and Brian had effectively taken the magic out. Brian's version of John Constantine was very much just this kind of tough guy walking down the mean streets kind of thing. It was very noirish, I think. What I did, I put the magic back, but I still liked the way Jamie Delano defined Constantine when he first created the character, which is as the laughing magician. That is somebody who, yes, he can do magic when he needs to, but actually his big tool is sarcasm. His big tool is just not respecting or taking seriously any of the demons or angels or gods or monsters that he encounters. John Constantine is humanity talking back to the gods and not taking any shit.
Bueno, sobre Unwritten, hay un momento dado de Unwritten que es, tiene una mitología sobre escritores, una confabulación, pero hay un momento dado en el que matas a una serie de escritores, cada uno de un género. Yo no sé si eso está un poco buscado, si es una crítica como en el Quijote, que quemaban los libros, y tú matas a esos autores criticando a ese tipo de género.
Oh, when you mean in the Frankenstein story? Where
yes.
Okay. So is this me sort of like attacking those styles?
Yeah, right.
It wasn't really that. No, I mean, I think what I was doing, I was playing with the relationship between reality and fiction, and that there is kind of a sense that we come back to again and again in the story that reality is unavailable. We don't live in the real world. We think we live in the real world, but actually we live in stories about the real world that we tell ourselves. Obviously, all religions are based on stories. Nations tell stories about their past and about their present. Those myths about, well, in your case it would be Spain, in my case it would be Britain, are really, really important to people's sense of themselves. And so throughout the series, Tom is constantly sort of stepping a little bit sideways from reality into other stories. And in that particular story, where all the horror writers die, I guess I was just putting them through the same things that they put their characters through. So it was a meditation, but it was a fond meditation on how horror works and on how horror tropes work. And then we did the same thing later on with children's literature. We had a story that was all about the characters, the anthropomorphic animal characters from children's literature. And again, it was just what would it be like if these characters existed in the real world?
Yo quería preguntarte sobre Orson Scott Card, que le hiciste una adaptación, que es La sombra de Ender. Yo quería preguntarte por este personaje tan peculiar, que a todos nos encanta como escritor, pero tiene un lado un poco, le apartaron de varias promociones de su película, del juego de Ender, que saber tu opinión sobre esto y si fue justo o no.
Oh, but sort of like making the story center on Bean rather than on Ender. I thought that was it's my favorite book in the whole of the Ender cycle, and I think it works brilliantly because in Ender's Game, everything depends upon the ending and the sort of the trick that he plays on you at the ending, and so you can really only read Ender's Game once. It only works once. Once you know what the big reveal is, it kind of loses a lot of its dramatic force. But in the story of Bean, you know from the start what that ending is. And so you're revisiting those characters and those relationships, knowing in advance where the story is tending. And so I think it's a much more intimate story. I think it's a much more emotionally powerful story. For me it was, in any case.
Pues, Fiji, la última pregunta ya, sobre la película de Girl with All the Gifts, sobre zombies, about zombies, con Jim Close, que eres guionista, aparte de la novela. ¿Cómo te sentiste como guionista cuando trasladan toda esa imagen, trabajar con Jim Close, que no sé cómo se convence a una actriz tan veterana como ella, hace una peli de zombies? Cuéntame un poquito sobre la película con Jim Close y cómo lo viste.
Story.
I can't speak to how she felt. I know how I felt. It was one of the most purely magical and wonderful experiences of my life. I was writing the novel and writing the screenplay at the same time. They were both adaptations of a short story that I had written, and I sent in the screenplay in 2014, late in 2014, and then they started making the movie about 9 months later. And at that point, usually the writer would expect to be no longer part of the process. You hand in the screenplay and then other people take it away and make a movie out of it. But in fact what happened was the producer, Camille Gatin, and the director, Colin McCarthy, kept on inviting me onto the set. They insisted that I should be there for the tech recce, when they chose the locations for the film. I was there for the casting. I was there for a lot of the shooting, not all of it, but a lot of it. So I got to interact with Glenn Close and with Gemma Arterton and with Paddy Considine and with Senya, who was our young lead, our Melanie. And it was just wonderful. I was sort of allowed to be part of that world. And nothing in my life up to that point had prepared me for that. It was amazing. Glenn in particular was just so nice and so approachable and so much what you would not expect. You sort of think that Hollywood actors are kind of narcissistic and immature, and Glenn was not. Glenn was incredibly cool. We talked a lot about science, about biology. She reads popular science, and so do I, and so we swapped books. It was an amazing time.
Bueno, pues nada más, hemos acabado. Muchas gracias por venir y encantado de conocerte y un admirador.
So that's all. Thank you for coming. I really admire your work and thank you for coming.
Thank you. Pleasure was all mine. Thanks a lot.